Hello and welcome to Channel 17's Town Meeting Television and another live candidate forum for the 2018 general election. I'm Matt Kelly. Joining us this evening are candidates Robert Bancroft, he goes by the name Bob Bancroft, sorry Bob. Also we've got Dylan Giambatista from 8-2 and 8-3. Excuse me, 8-3 and 8-2, respectively. I apologize about that. We have news that Lori Houghton and John Brennan will not be with us this evening, so unfortunately we have two candidates for the positions. So we have an opportunity to have a pretty wide-ranging open discussion here. And we'll begin with you, Bob, with an opening statement about why you're running again for office and what you see the challenges that are ahead for the state of Vermont and why you think you're primed to face them.
Well, the reason I'm running, and basically my platform is no different than it was 4 years ago or 2 years ago. I decided to run 4 years ago because I believe that the state of Vermont was in serious financial straits and getting worse, and that has not improved in the last 4 years. So it's my hope to continue to bring that message to Montpelier and hopefully make some strides and getting some economic growth and getting our financial house in order. And it's a pretty tall task, but if we don't do it, the situation is only going to get worse, and the repercussions are going to be quite devastating to many people, particularly the lower income and the disadvantaged people, because we're just not going to be able to afford these social programs that we have now, much less any new ones.
Very good. Dylan Giambatista from 8-2. Tell us why you're running again for office.
Well, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. Appreciate working across district lines here to chat with Bob as well. But my name's Dylan. I'm one of your state representatives in the village of Essex Junction. I've been your state representative since 2016 when I won election. And you know, I got involved with government and politics because I feel like we need a fresh set of eyes on what's going on. You know, I'm one of the younger members of the Vermont House of Representatives, but more than that, I'm thinking about the economy and what's going to be going on in the next generation. And to me, we got to start to take a look at the way that we do business in Vermont, but also the way that we actually address our challenges together. I'm tired of hearing about all of our hardship and that we can't work together to fix it, because I grew up in this state. I know we can. I believe in our state. I believe in its people. And I believe that together we can work through the challenges. So I'm looking forward to talking about issues here over the next half hour or so. And if you have any questions, want to call in, please do. I hope we get a chance to chat. And I've been out knocking doors, so if I haven't come to your door yet, I hope to soon. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk issues.
Very good, Dylan. Thank you so much. A reminder that if you do have a question for either of the candidates or state representatives, our phone number is 862-3966. And we welcome all our viewers enjoying our online stream at ch17.tv. So, Dylan, let's get right on to this, because Bob did raise an issue about why he's running for office. He thinks the financials for the state of Vermont are in dire consequences and not really getting better. Your thoughts on that and what you think needs to happen in order for that to change?
Sure. So
do you agree with that first?
Well, I think what we've got going here in Vermont is many of the challenges that rural America is facing. And you know, in Essex Junction, we have scale, we have capacity. We have a lot of folks living in our community. In fact, it's the fastest growing in the state. And we have an education system that is there to support the needs of residents as they move forward and get a good paying get a good education and a good paying job. But here's what I see. I do admit that we have challenges in our economy. I was honored this past year. The Senate and House of Representatives voted unanimously to appoint me to the State College's Board of Trustees. That's given me a window into the unique challenges that our employers face and also that our workers face. You see, in Vermont, you need a good education to get a good paying job. In fact, there was a recent statistic nationally that said of the 11.6 million jobs created since the Great Recession, only 100,000 went to folks who did not have college education. So for me, as I start to look at the challenges, I should let you know I'm a high school dropout. I faced difficulties as a young learner. I see opportunities in our institutions of education, both at the K-12 level, but also at the higher education and post-secondary level. What we need to do is equip people with the tools to get a good paying job. And the way that we do that is we focus on developing what we call career pathways in Vermont. This is a way of taking a look at people's educational needs and linking them to the employment needs of our employers in the community. By doing that, I think we can demonstrate value in our education system. We can start to develop the scale we need to retain our citizens here, and we can get them into good paying jobs.
Very good. Great answer. So, Bob, we'll bring this back to you. You had raised that you think the state of Vermont's financial situation is dire. It's not getting better, and economic growth is one of your key issues. Can you speak to the financial situation you feel that we are in and what you think needs to happen for economic growth to occur?
You look at the statistics, and the state of Vermont is doing very poor compared to other states. And we're in 9 years in an economic expansion, and you would hope that we would be doing better. But we're saddled with some really structural problems. We're the second oldest state, the average age, the second oldest. And so a lot of people are leaving the workforce. And because of the high cost of living in this state, people are moving out. People have been moving out of the state of Vermont for at least for the last 50, 60 years. My parents left and went to Florida in the 80s.
And come back.
And left in the 80s. It's been my thesis, and I think it's being borne out, that there's going to be a higher percentage of people moving out of the state, and they're going to be people, these are retired people, they're going to be people that have better than average income. And we're seeing some of those statistics now. The income, I think for the last 2 years, 2016, 2017, the income of people moving into the state is lower than the income of the people moving out. That's a complete reversal from what it had been for decades prior to that. I hear from employers in the tech field. First off, I agree with Dylan that education is key. I have a PhD, and I think in order for this country to excel on the world stage, education is the key.
So we're going to move on here. I apologize.
We could go all night if we had to.
But so could that actually then is going to go right into my next question here. Senator Sanders has proposed, 2 years of college free. Maybe, in exchange for national service or something. You've talked about education as being the key. Is that a solution? Free college for Vermonters?
I'm very skeptical of something that's free. I was at UVM for 10 years, and I'd have to say that at least 25%, maybe 40% of the students that I had back in those days probably ought not to have been there. They were there because their parents wanted them, peer pressure, what have you, and it was really a waste of money and I think a waste of their time. Although the problem is leaving and then coming back. That is a problem. So if you make something free, then the demands for it's going to go up, and I'm not sure that the benefit, the marginal additional benefit we'd get from that is worth it. And then we get to the issue: how do we pay for it? And I ask any of these programs that are being offered, I don't care what they are, from education to you name it, I want people to tell me where you're going, what programs would you give up? I think we need to start the conversation there.
Okay. Dylan, you're uniquely poised to answer this question with your relationship to the state colleges. 2 years free college, is that the answer to increased wages for Vermonters?
Well, I certainly think it's part of the equation. And even, Bob was saying, you got to have an education in this world to make it. And the statistics bear it out both nationally and frankly internationally at this point. But here's what I know. We're going through a period of immense social, environmental, and economic change, not only in the United States of America, but across the country. And as far as I'm concerned, if we don't start to lean on education and recognize the resource that it is for folks to lift standards of living, to give folks opportunity, we're going to be in a tough place. As far as I'm concerned, we can't afford the cost of college debt right now on young workers. And it's not just about earning a college degree anymore. It's about stackable credentials. It's about getting people the skills that they need. Say you want to go into the nursing field, if you can get a VNA along the way, or that lower nursing accreditation, and then work up to a bachelor level education, however you want to stack it to grow the skills, to get the good paying job. We know we have the employment gap. In fact, on the way over, I heard a news story that we're actually looking for nurses right now in this state and that we project a shortfall. But here's the thing. I don't want to talk about all of our challenges and our demographic doom and gloom when we have opportunities. People move to Vermont come back to Vermont, stay in Vermont, because there is a mission-driven identity that draws people here, and that mission-driven identity actually is built into brands, multinational brands, you know, the Ben & Jerry's of the world, the dealer.coms. These are good paying, decent jobs, and we got to make sure that we're focusing on our strengths and our attributes. That's something I bring to the State House as one of the younger members, and it's something that I want to represent because, frankly, if we don't focus on that economic need and making sure that we have the young people coming in that can actually be the population to support the programs that we have, we will face challenges. But I think our best days ahead, and I think we got to work together to get there.
So I'm going to kind of continue on this and build on what Bob was talking about here in terms of education, in that when he was in UVM, 40% of the kids shouldn't have even been in the classroom. We have a workforce shortage in this state. There's millions of dollars of construction that are happening right now in Chittenden County that we don't have the skilled personnel to actually do those jobs. That means all those wages are going to outside employees from outside of Vermont who are coming in, and that money is leaving the state. What is the state doing to try to build a workforce to keep these dollars at home and build livable wages? Yep. Dylan.
Well, so I think one of the real bright spots that we have is we do have this renewed focus on these career pathways, both at our K-12 education level with our tech centers and our high schools, but continuing through as well to make sure that folks can access a good education at any point during their career. Look, you know, you reference a really important point here. We're not just talking about liberal arts degrees. We're not just talking about folks who want to go get a 4-year degree with a master's degree on top of it. We're talking about folks who want to go get an education to do the trades or to do other things. And I think we really need to rethink some of the stigmas that have existed for years with that type of occupation. I'll tell you what, if I could rethink what I'm doing in my life, and I worked in the trades a bit, I've worked just about every job there was after I dropped out of high school, I often think, boy, I would love to be an electrician. Wouldn't I love to go get those high-tech, in-demand skills that are now needed? And we're seeing in our employment gap, I think, an opportunity. But we're going to have to be nimble about the way that we communicate with our employers, the way that we work with our higher education community, but also the way that we reimagine and reinvigorate our education system. I'll tell you what, we have the best educators in the state in Vermont. We got to make sure that we're supporting them and that we're giving folks the tools to do this important work.
Bob, so again, you'd kind of raised this issue about, students in a classroom that maybe shouldn't be there. Is the Vermont education system serving the students enough so that they're getting the education for these high-paying, skilled labor jobs? And if not, what are we doing to do so?
The answer to that is no, but I think we've recognized the problem. And so I think you'll see, and there has been some more emphasis, and I think part of it's just going to be education to inform students that there are other options. Dylan mentioned about being an electrician. I mean, I've talked with the people in the contractors, and they're willing to take a young person who has an aptitude and maybe has gone to a vocational high school and got a little bit of training there. They will pay for the training. And they'll pay for that person to get his license up to he's a master electrician and earning $100,000+. Yeah. And that's the same for plumbers and many other occupations. So college isn't always the answer for everyone. Right. But I think the other thing that, the other side of the equation, I think it's actually even bigger, is the cost of living in this state. I talk with employers, particularly in the high-tech industry. They say that they can compete on entry-level salaries for individuals in that high-tech sector. But when they come up here and they see the housing costs, and one of them said to me, the person came to him and said, "What is this $6,000 property tax?" If we don't have affordable housing here, if cost of living is too high, then we're not going to be able to attract those people to the state. We must do something in that. And I think there's several things that we can do about that. We need to expand housing, and that is really critical. We need to expand housing all the way from the homeless to the low income, and particularly right now to the working middle class. And we need to lower that price, and part of that hopefully is lower property taxes. and see other areas where we're high on cost. Electricity, I don't know if people saw in the Free Press, had an article about Global Foundries. That's 2,500 jobs, and they're really concerned about the cost of electricity. It's expensive for businesses. So it isn't just the cost of living for individuals, but it's also the cost of doing business in the state.
So in a sense, we'll continue on that. We'll continue with Bob and go to Dylan on this. And it is about the affordability issue here. I left Vermont in 1990. I was paying $300 a month for a two-bedroom apartment, making about $28,000 a year. Fast forward how many years later, that apartment is $1,200, but the wage is still $28,000 a year. So when you talk about affordability, and you both have been in the State House, is the affordability, going back to you to say, rent control? Because that's where it's rising. I don't think you can go and say, stop the increase in home prices, because that's market forces right there. But the affordability that really can come is from the state saying rent control. And yet everybody is stepping away from that, and yet I'm hearing, oh, it needs to be more affordable and more affordable, but yet nobody in Montpelier is saying rent control to keep these costs down.
Well, I know I'm not allowed to interview the interviewer, but you did talk about how you left and came back.
Sure.
And for me, that's part of the story of Vermont, is that people do make decisions about where they want to be. They might pick it because of the quality of life. They might pick it because they're looking for an opportunity there with a job, or maybe a spouse has a job. They might pick it because of the education system. For me, I noted it earlier, we really are going through a fundamental transformation in our economy. And we're thinking with 20th century ideas in a 21st century world. And in Vermont in particular, the challenge that I see is, we can talk about the challenges of affordability, and I will acknowledge that they exist because they're very real for folks in our community and elsewhere. But at the end of the day, the question is, how do you grow your way out of the challenge? Because I don't think that the answer is necessarily to, take a look at where you're spending and cut, cut, cut. I think that's part of a good, accountable government process. But for me, it starts with, how do we actually grow the population? So when I hear from folks, Bob's right. Employers tell us, hey, folks want to move here for a job, but they say, I can't access the housing. They might get here, they might say, I can't pay for the child care. They might want to stay here, but they say, look, I have these student debts, so I have diminished purchasing power, don't have enough money in my pocket, can't put a down payment down on a house, or whatever it may be. At the end of the day, I think when we approach our challenges in Vermont, we got to start from a place of, how are we going to entice people here? How are we going to keep them here? But more importantly, what are the assets that we already have that will make that sustainable? And for me, our education system, our quality of life, our mission-driven sense of purpose and identity in Vermont, it's unique and it's an asset. We ought to celebrate those strengths as we go about trying to solve these challenges.
Okay. Affordability, rent control, how do you keep rents low? That seems to be a driver for most people. You can't put a brake on the housing prices. So.
Well, I have a PhD in economics, and to rent control, I say hell no. If you want to exacerbate the problem, that's just exactly what you would do. What we need to do is we need to increase the supply of housing. And whether it be apartments or
here in the city of Burlington, just in the last 36 months, the housing stock has increased exponentially. It hasn't decreased the rents.
Well, I think there's such a pent-up demand. Rents are going to be the intersection of supply and demand.
Right.
And if you increase that supply, then eventually prices are going to come down. But I think there's pent-up demand, so there's going to be a lag. But until we increase the supply of housing, and that's going to be done through a couple of ways. I think it can be done through a couple of ways. One, we need to reduce the regulations involved.
To build more housing.
To build more housing. Part of my consulting work that I've done over the years has been an Act 250 work. And now, Act 250 is a great, I'm glad it was there. If we have it, it's got great goals and it's achieved, it would be terrible what would happen to Vermont if we didn't have it. But it constrains the supply of housing. And it drives up the price. I had a developer tell me that by the time he ended up paying me, and he paid the lawyers and the engineers, and again, no guarantee that they'd get the plan, and they'd have to downscale it, and then if it's on ag land, they've got to go out and buy land, that he's got $100,000+ into the lot, and he hasn't done one thing. He has not put a road in, utilities aren't in. So we need to kind of streamline the regulations. I'm not saying make them weaker, but streamline them so we can reduce that development cost. And then the other aspect is that we need to look at other things like electricity, the cost of electricity, the other expenses that we have.
So I'm going to interject here in a little bit and offer something. So child care, you had mentioned, seemed to be a major concern of people when they're looking for jobs in housing and relocating and whatnot. And we're talking now maybe about 20th century solutions in a 21st century era. And I had spoken with some other representatives about this. The legislature thought under Shumlin to shift the health care to the state. Okay, so it doesn't go on the employer. Would that then allow the employer to offer other benefit incentives like child care? I would imagine a Global Foundries could set up a child care center there and offer that as a benefit if the state were to be able to take over the health care fee that they have to incur. 21st century solutions?
Well, so from my perspective, you raise an intriguing concept. I think the question is, are fringe benefits, are benefits that employers are offering, which is a sort of a mid-20th century construct, in lieu of compensation, is that the best way to deliver it? And we're having a pretty robust discussion, both nationally and also in Vermont we've had the discussion. I'm not sure if Bob and I will agree completely on this, but for me, I think any time that you can remove those benefits from the backs of employers, and keep in mind, people talk about this a lot as an employee-driven decision, but I actually view it as an opportunity to lift the burden from employers. I think that we do expand their economic opportunity. Now, here's a great example. We took action in Vermont to create a Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan, which is a retirement option for small businesses, employees or employers of 50 or less who may not currently offer their employees a retirement benefit option. To me, this is a smart policy because we're going to allow businesses to opt in. It's not mandatory for now. It's an opt-in program, and it will give folks the opportunity, maybe for the first time ever, to enroll and give their employees a benefit that's going to help them achieve financial security in the future. Anytime that we can ensure retirement preparedness and put more money into folks' pockets down the road, we ought to do it. So that's a solution that I think works well. And I'll let Bob maybe chat a little bit about some of the other benefits that are out there, but I think that we can do better. And if we don't, talk about a crisis of affordability. When the markets go kaput sometime in the next couple years, we got to figure out what we're going to do long term to make sure that everyone has a reliable retirement in this state, and we got to start now. And I'm glad Vermont has taken action to move in the right direction.
Bob, just to follow up, your thoughts on shifting maybe from the employer healthcare driven to the state healthcare mandate to free them up to offer other incentives to employees.
Well,
21st century
I'm going to go back to being an economist, and
Yeah.
there's no free lunch.
Right.
So obviously, if Global Foundries could not have to provide or decided not to provide health insurance, and there was no other cost associated with that would come to bear on them, then obviously they could afford to offer other kinds of benefits. But the question then is, how are you going to fund this health care that you're talking about?
Sure.
And that's going to cost money.
Sure.
And I assume that's going to be raised through taxes. And so
will it come through increased economic growth? I believe that if you are unshackling big business from the erroneous burden of providing health care for their employees, and then the state take that over, won't you be unshackling them to let economic growth occur unimpeded in a way that we have not seen since probably the 50s?
I'm not convinced that it will, again, because of no free lunch.
Right.
If taxes rise to the point where businesses say, no, I have to leave, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Right.
We're in a very fluid world. Businesses can move to other states, they can move to other countries, and so we have to be cognizant of that. And so it all depends on what the cost of doing business is going to be.
Sure.
If we remove that one thing from it, is there another cost that's going to come in, and what kind of impact is that going to have? Obviously, to the extent that companies have flexibility, that's great, and that would unleash things. But there's a negative side to it, and that's how you're going to pay for it.
Okay. And moving then on to this, Dylan, we'll continue. We are in an era of no new fees and no new taxes from the governor's office. How then do we fund the programs that are needed, that are currently unfunded? Cleaning up our lakes and streams, addressing the potential issues of climate change, which I don't think the state is focusing on yet, which have to do with fire control. We've got a forest full of ash trees that are going to be eliminated here from the beetle, and that's going to be a fire hazard with climate change that we're not prepared for. So in an era of no new fees and taxes, how do we pay for the challenges that are ahead of us?
Well, I mean, I will be the first to acknowledge that I do think that we have a revenue challenge in the state. And, you know, I had a gentleman the other night at a forum that I was at who said, well, you know, we need an occupancy fee in order to fund this program. And I tried to walk him through, well, here's what the legislative process looks like if you propose or introduce a new fee or tax proposal. What I will say is this, that, you know, I do think we do pay some high taxes in parts of the state for different services and different goods and things of that nature. I'm not going to be someone who's going to tell you or sugarcoat it otherwise. But I think when it comes to a natural asset like our lakes and waterways, for us to not actually put in place a responsible funding source that will meet the obligations set forth by the EPA, that will clean up our waterways and put in place reliable funding going forward is problematic. And here's why. It shortchanges us in the future because we're passing the buck to future generations. And that's when the problem will cost even more. Our state treasurer, through a collaborative process, put in place a series of recommendations on how we can fund clean water. None of them got airtime this past session for a variety of reasons. And we still have yet to hear from our governor about how he intends to fund it. Here's what I know. We can do all the political gimmicks we want, but we need to be real with the citizens of Vermont that that's going to cost a lot of money. And it's going to cost a lot of money because those lakes and waterways are absolutely integral to the success of our state going forward. I can't imagine our tourism brand. I can't imagine, frankly, the health of our waterways as they relate to our personal health. Anything in that regard that we do not address sooner is going to cost us more down the road. So we need to really do that analysis. What is the benefit here? And I believe that funding sooner than later is going to pay off better in future generations.
So the question again is, I mean, we're in an era of no new taxes and fees. How do you fund this? Where does the money come from when at the top there's a big stop sign saying no fees, no new taxes?
Well, I did see that the governor is floating the idea of having increased fees this year, so he's like that. And then I know there's been conversations with the governor and among other people about coming up with some sort of revenue source to clean up Vermont's lakes. And I think that's of the highest priority. We must do it. As Dylan indicated, we have a revenue challenge in the state. So it's going to be difficult finding that. Again, my suggestion is that people come up if it's the highest priority, and I think it is one of the highest priorities. What are you willing to give up? If you can't generate the revenue, and if you try to increase taxes, and if it does, and I believe it will end up in the long run lowering taxes because businesses will leave and economic growth will decline and more people will be tempted to move out. So we need to tread real careful in this area. But we need to find fundings so that we can upgrade our sewage treatment plants. I mean, this summer has been a disaster. Both here in Burlington and in Rutland, and I know Montpelier has had its share of problems. I think there are being some advantages being made, or some progress being made with farmers, and that's very encouraging. Unfortunately, I think past practices, you can't the phosphorus is in the soil. It's in places where we wished it wasn't, and this only way we're going to get rid of it is over time. But what we need to do, and I think we are making some giant steps in that area, is making sure that we're not putting that phosphorus back in those marginal areas.
All right, well, it's time for our final candidate statements. We'll ask each candidate to take 60 seconds and wrap up why they are running for re-election and the challenges they see ahead for the state of Vermont and how they expect to face them. And Bob, we'll begin with you.
Well, as I started out in the introduction, I believe that economic growth is the #1 priority, and in that economic growth, affordability I think is the primary area where we need to focus on. That's not to say that we have other issues, but in order to generate the tax revenue to address many of the social problems, and even to keep funding the existing social programs that we have, are going to become more and more challenging if we can't generate that revenue. So I think the legislature needs to focus on affordability, and that covers the whole gamut from housing, coming up programs to increase the supply of housing, and lowering other costs so that people can afford to come to the state. And once we get people coming to the state, we're going to do fantastically well. Vermont is, all we need to do is read the news and what's happening down in Florida. Why wouldn't everybody want to move to Vermont? If we could just make it affordable, it would be a boom.
Dylan Giambatista, your final thoughts on your candidacy and your running for re-election?
Yeah, well, I want to thank Channel 17 and Bob for stepping across district lines here to have a debate. And I'm sorry that the other candidates in the Village District couldn't make it tonight. But you know, for the last 2 years, I've had the opportunity to represent Essex Junction in the Vermont House of Representatives. I've tried to be a representative who goes out of his way to communicate. You've probably seen my name in the Essex Reporter on Front Porch Forum. You've probably seen that with Representative Houghton, I've held over 15 forums in the community since we got elected to make sure that we're getting the feedback loop from the community. And I'll tell you what, after chatting with folks, serving on our education committee, and having the opportunity to get into the schools and chat with parents, I know that I'm listening because all of your ideas, I've made sure that I bring them back to the education committee where they can be heard. In terms of serving on the in the higher education realm as a member of the State College's Board of Trustees, I've had that opportunity to work with our employers and our employees on the front lines, trying to understand what we're going to do to give our residents and citizens the skills they need to get into a good paying job. Across the board, I've tried to be open, I've tried to be transparent, and if you have any questions, I want you to call me. I'm at 802-734-8841, or you can shoot me an email. It's Dylan, D-Y-L-A-N, like Bob, at vtdylan.com, and I hope to hear from you. Until then, I'll be knocking on your door soon, so get ready for it and get your best questions ready. I really appreciate the opportunity to serve.
Well, my thanks to Dylan Giambatista and for Bob Bancroft. Thank you very much for joining us here from 8-2 and 8-3 respectively. A reminder that Lori Houghton and John Brennan's names will be on the ballot. They just weren't here this evening. Don't forget, early voting is already underway in the state of Vermont. You can go to your town clerk's office, register, and cast your ballot on the same day. And don't forget to go to our website to find out a complete list of upcoming candidate forums at ch17.tv. For all of us at Town Meeting Television, I'm Matt Kelly. Thank you for watching.